Yay? Okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm following up on Hannah's talk for kind of an intro to web components. I am also not a web component pro, but this has been a space that's been interesting me a lot lately, just to kind of learn about these two technologies and kind of how they solve some of the same problems, but now they're starting to integrate together. So I want to talk about web components in React, or can you do that? Should you do that? That's kind of the problem space I'm looking for. So it's just called web components in React, or maybe better, web components in React. This is me. My name is Mark Paul Freeman. I am a UI engineer here at SAP Concur as well. I've been here just over 2 years, and I've been kind of doing UI development for 5-ish years. I am more than a developer, though. I have a family. I have a wife and 3-year-old daughter and a 5-month-old baby boy. I like coffee, and I drink that every day. I like whiskey. I drink that less than that. I like wine. Washington makes great versions of all 3 of those, so we live in like a really cool place, and we like to enjoy that. I play drums, kind of. I play soccer, kind of. I snowboard once a winter, and I like to get outside. That's a little bit about me. Ever since I kind of started into web development, I have been focused and interested on user interfaces, like being able to use clean and easy, websites that you can get around, you can navigate easily, things make sense. I've always been drawn to that, so I knew getting into web development I wanted to kind of focus on UI. And so as I got into that and learned just kind of the basic like HTML, CSS, reusing patterns across sites and applications, I was just kind of like, yay, like I'm into components, this all makes sense, like the idea of components is cool, I'm for that. JavaScript started blowing up like right around the time I was getting into things, and I tried out Angular, and it was like a little bit it felt foreign, and this is a React meetup, so once I saw React I was like, I'm coming into this kind of as a new guy, and this makes sense. Like, this is simple to understand, it is like prop driven, its UI is a function of state. These concepts made a lot of sense, so I was like, yay, I like React, I'm going to kind of pursue this for a while. So I've been doing React for about 3 years. And so now, like, we work with React and we build React apps, and I am like a big fan, but now I'm like, web components, maybe? Like, I don't know, this is like, again, trying to solve similar problems, and I just kind of wanted to explore, like, what is it about these technologies that is beneficial, and do they work together, that kind of thing. So, web components. Hannah already hit on some of the, just sort of the core of underneath the umbrella of web components. But this is, custom elements, the shadow DOM, what lives kind of inside of that component. The concept of like ES modules, the ability to kind of import things like in the browser, and then templates, which is sort of that, defining a template and using it throughout your web components. I'm going to focus though on the top 2 primarily, because this started as a lightning talk and it kind of grew. So I was shooting for a lightning talk, and now it's going to be kind of like half and half lightning and a little more detailed talk. So I'm going to focus mostly on kind of creating a component and looking at the shadow DOM and does that work with React. But let's zoom out a little bit and just ask, like, why would we use web components in React, right? Like, if people are like full in on building React apps, and that's working for you, and like your whole company is in on React and stuff, it's like, what's the point? I have a framework and I have this model that makes total sense by itself, and we're invested all into it. Like, where do web components fit in? And I would say, at least what I am learning, and maybe my opinion is that the design system space is one of kind of the highest, like the biggest selling points for web components. And there's been teams and companies that have worked on web component libraries that sort of have summarized that as well and said, like, this is a great use case for web components. So, you know, design systems being like teams like our Core UI team, the team that builds kind of the company's like cross-company component library. But design system goes beyond that because, like, the bigger the company you're at, you could potentially have sites and applications built in, like, you could have like a WordPress marketing site, and you could have like another CMS that does your public stuff, and then you could have your core application that's built with React, and you could have like a side thing that's, you know, Angular and Vue and all these other things happening. But, you know, you want some core design language and set of like design tokens and small components that like could be developed solely in one place and then spread out, right? Like to be able to update one thing in one team in one place, and to kind of have that update itself in all the consuming applications, right? You can't do that if your design system is built in React, because then what does the CMS do when they don't have React on their sites? And like, what does WordPress do? You know, like, so I think the design system space is kind of one that it's kind of like the first place that I could see web components really gaining popularity, especially for just like the root level, like core small buttons and, you know, just form elements and stuff like that. So that's small design systems rant. But beyond that, web components are built now. They're becoming standard into the browser. So HTML spec and browser specifications have sort of blessed these. They're beyond like a version 1.0 now. So browsers are able to recognize, and you know, you saw the DOM APIs that Hannah mentioned. I'll talk a little bit more about. You can do that stuff natively in the browser. You don't need a framework. You don't need extra JavaScript to the page necessarily, unless it's a polyfill. So because of that, you know, you get kind of like this future-proofing idea. Like JavaScripts might fall by the wayside over time, but browser standards are very well thought through and aren't really going anywhere once they're there. You get, you know, because of that as well, if you ship less JavaScript to the browser, you get the performance of like from the runtime itself. And web components are also like encapsulated, meaning it's a benefit. I kind of put an asterisk there because it's a benefit and a negative, right? Like if you have something that's like self-contained, if you have a component that kind of like does all its own thing and styles itself and can't be accessed from outside, well, that could be really great on like a blog platform where someone wants to build like, you know, this nice widget or map or something complicated, but they don't want anyone else to affect it, right? They just want to be able to drop this thing on like a news page or something. You know, actually, yeah, there was someone from Seattle Times that gave a talk a year ago, and he's like, I do web components, probably 2 years ago, and it was like a great use case. But obviously, this is Seattle React.js, and to be able to do that with React, that's maybe not the same thing that you're wanting to do. So should we do them in React? But all that to say, the question isn't really like, are web components ready to be used? Like, they are ready. For this context and people building React applications, it's actually, do they interoperate with React, right? Like, people are using them. Can we use them in React apps? Does that make sense? Short answer is kind of. Like, we'll go into some of the detail, and I'll hit on four topics or parts of web components that maybe will help explain some of like the benefits and the problems. So number one is attributes. So think of like a tag, you know, like kind of the image source idea. If you want to build like a custom image tag, custom element for inside of web component or as a web component, attributes totally work. Like the source tag is something that React understands. So like I'm now getting into the context of like, you render JSX basically, and I'll show a few slides to illustrate this. So, but like attributes, like the little, kind of like props as we think of them in React. I'm talking about the actual DOM element attributes. These totally work. So like, if it's a string, a number, like any of these primitives, this is fine to do in JSX. So like, these slides are like inside your render function in React, right? Custom element is a tag. It's a custom element. And you could pass it an attribute called message with a string. Great, like React will do this for you. No problems with JSX. This will render to the page. Same thing here. Like you could pass in as kind of using our like expression syntax. You could pass numbers in there, Boolean. This is all totally acceptable from React and JSX. Next is synthetic events, like things like on click, on mouse over, like things that React gives us. That's also okay. So like if you have a web component tag, custom element, and you pass the React handler like on click, the kind of like accepted way to do this in JSX, this also works. Like that's something happens in the Shadow DOM underneath all of this. But if you just care about whether the whole thing was clicked, like this is fine. It's at the outer level. Nothing will go downward. Nothing will go to the Shadow DOM. But you can specify in React that the outer thing was clicked and handle that just fine. Then this is where we get a little sticky. Like you have beyond attributes, you have properties, like element properties that are kind of internal to the web component. And this is kind of where it's like, this doesn't work so great. Because our friend createRef needs to be involved. And the code doesn't look quite so clean anymore. So the center one is kind of the main, like this here, some property, this is kind of the key. This would be something that's defined in the web component itself. They kind of expose or make available. And frameworks like Vue and Angular actually handle this pretty well. Like it's pretty easy to just sort of, basically like in here, we would expect to say custom element, some property equals, and it could be an object or an array, right? You can't do that in JSX because it doesn't understand how to pass like rich data down through attributes like that, or it thinks it's an attribute. So we have to do this. We have to say, make a ref, then, after this is mounted, assign kind of the actual DOM elements property to something in React, and then pass the ref in here, right? So like that's not great. This is not how we think of like declarative easy JSX, right? Like, so like why? Why do we have to do this? The shortest answer really is this, that like JSX is not the same as HTML. So JSX has kind of given us these extra keys and conveniences, but they don't match up with like DOM properties directly. So to illustrate this a bit more, like let's say you have a React component called thing list, and you want to give it a prop of things. So that's like an array. Things is not like things. JSX knows that things is real, and it knows how to understand it because the thing list is a React component. It's been defined. It has props. Like React understands all of this. So JSX is cool with that. Same thing here. This is not a React component. This is a div. This is a straight HTML tag. But like I said earlier, you can use kind of the handlers that React gives us, and you can do on mouse over, on click, like all those ones, and handle it on something that's not, it's not a web component. It's also not a React component. This is also fine. The problem is it doesn't know what to do when you have a custom element and you also have a custom property. Like, that doesn't work. And this is what I said, like, this would be ideal if we had. This would make web components inside of React look exactly like all of React components we're used to doing. But we can't do this because some prop is like, they're like, you know, I think you get like a JSX warning that's like, or a React warning that's like, you know, or did you mean to do this as like a custom attribute on a tag? Like maybe lowercase it instead because you're trying to use an attribute. But again, things is an array, and so you can't pass an array into something that's expecting a string or a number anyway. So this is kind of like, this slide I feel like kind of summarizes most of the problem. Then you have actual custom custom element events, which these are things that can be dispatched or fired from the element itself. And this is basically the same thing as properties. Like this could be done in two ways, really. Like you would expose an on event or on something property that React could kind of pick up on. So this looks identical to the property one if it's exposed that way by the element. The other way would be actually in React saying, like, I want to listen for some event, right? As like, this was actually an event dispatched out of the React, or out of the element, the custom element. And then you could handle it like this. Same thing, you need a ref to do it. But it's just kind of like it's two different ways of doing the same thing. So, how am I on time? Tyler? Okay. I'm gonna zip through and try to do a quick demo. Oh, you can't see. Oh no, this is not gonna work. You see that? Yeah. Okay. This is my first talk ever, and I'm going to try and live demo, which is a terrible idea. But what I've done here, I want to just kind of go through really quick and show you that I have a
text size, please.
Yes, I can, although it might ruin things soon. Is that any better?
One more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hopefully this works. Okay, so really quick, I don't want to get into too much detail because it'll take too much time. I'll share this later, but I created this thing. This is a custom element, so extends HTML element. Because we're in a modern browser, there's not even a polyfill or anything. But basically, the summary is it's going to display a like a face and a color. And so there's two ways of kind of interacting with this element, which I'll show you in a second on the React side. But it basically has like a face attribute, a color attribute. It can take in a whole mood object, like that's a property that it can take in. And then it also, this will come in later, but I also have a mood change event that is going to happen every 5 seconds, right? So this thing's just going to change its mood, and you'll see how that plays itself out. This is I kind of created a render function inside of this that gets called in a couple places when things change. And then this is the slot element, which takes in children, or it kind of accepts something from above. Same thing that Hannah said, mood box is defined. Hopefully that's enough of a summary. The code doesn't really matter on that side, but I want to show you the React side to basically just show you what this can do and what's possible. So mood box is being rendered right now. It's empty because I'm not giving it anything. So we can give this, again, these are attributes. So I like weird CSS colors, and so we're going to do chartreuse and a guitar to show you that that is the thing, right? That's a web component, and it's nothing. It's like a div. But the key here is that you can take, these are simple attributes and they can take strings and that works, right? Now, I also have, you know, kind of the next stage example. There's a like just an array of simple objects here that I'm pulling in, and now we have state involved. So initial state starts at just kind of like the first one in the list, and so you're seeing the first one, but passed in as like this is from state. So you can change that, and it will also change the mood. It'll change his face and color. This is what we would like to do, but this totally doesn't work. We want, like, this is what we would expect in React, right? Just like pass in an object, pass in the whole mood object, and just like have it render it. But again, I could inspect this, but it's basically like it gives you like object as a string, because it takes in an object and it's like, well, you gave me an attribute and now it just renders a string. So that doesn't work. What else was I gonna? Let's do these first. I'll just quickly show you. This is I have a couple other web components that I've imported from Google Material. They have a button and radio buttons that are entirely web components, so you can just import them. And let's keep this guy. And so now I have like change mood, and I have radio buttons. So now, you know, it randomly selects like the next mood. Okay, so this is like me in the progression like through web components. I'm like, I don't know, this is terrible. Like, yeah, maybe, like, okay, I'm happy, but I'm crying. What? Yeah, this is feeling better. Okay, cowboy, yay, all right. But then you kind of, I don't know, I'm still not sure. So yeah, you saw that the radio button state is accepting things from actual React state, but it's applying them into attributes on this thing, and it is re-rendering itself. So we're able to take changes in React, apply those down, and as long as the web components are written correctly, they'll update themselves, basically. And then the final one is where it gets a little more complicated. But now I'm just going to show you one example with like this ref stuff. And not. This could all blow up in my face. Let's see what happens. So again, there's I think I actually need to render something. So now I have this ref. Here, I'll scroll up a bit. I am doing kind of like the ugly like event listener here on mood change. That's that event that every 5 seconds fires from the element. So it's just saying something inside of this element happened. I'm gonna let you know about that. Whoever's listening, right? React says, okay, on that, do this. That's handle this from my context now in the parent. Set state for the next mood, and then basically pass that, that's going to reapply. I have access to the ref again. I'm resetting the mood, and it'll kind of change itself. So like notifies that it changed some state, React is aware, and sets that back. So save this and try it. I will touch nothing, and hopefully this changes. Nope, I broke it.
There it goes.
I did something. It's like kind of working.
It is.
Yeah, something's going. I missed something there. But basically, like the mood change is actually random, so it'll go backwards or forwards. You can still click this and like it'll advance, but then once that event kicks in, it'll like readjust itself, right? So, but all this to say, like, it does work. You can do this. It's not the prettiest thing ever. but yeah, let's exit that and resume. Okay, so deep breath really quick. This is crazy. What have we learned? React can render custom elements now. Like, it can do it. And the best practices that I've been reading about are kind of what we should maybe already be familiar with as like React developers, UI developers, is that data flows downward and events go up. So this is sort of a thing that is trying to be standardized in some way with both communities, because the React and the web components communities are not like necessarily the same. But if we can kind of agree on these patterns, it'll help web developers and custom element developers build these things in the proper way to be able to accept data from above and notify the parent that something happened. At the same time, I do think that, at least from kind of the research I've done and the stuff I've tried, the difficulty of interoperating between these two will grow with the complexity of the web component itself, right? I showed you like really simple divs, and you can do it with buttons and stuff. Like the easiest ones are just web components that have no state, internal state. They just take in props and they render some stuff, right? Those, by all means, like we can make web components, we can consume them as in React just fine. Some other considerations that I don't have time to get into. Server-side rendering is kind of a complicated one. Like a full-blown like server-side rendered React app, in kind of that state, like that I don't know. The way that we think of server-side rendering in React is like to kind of fully emit the DOM, and then to kind of like pass that down to the browser in a full HTML, and have it rehydrate. Some of that is okay with custom elements. Like the actual elements themselves are just HTML tags. So you can do that on the server. Like you can give that to a CMS, and it'll just pass that HTML down with the rest of the stuff. But it's like, it gets more complicated with the shadow DOM, and if like any of that has rich data, if any of the shadow DOM needs rich data to render itself, that can't happen till the client. So like there are some complexities there, but what I've heard is that it's not going to be impossible, and there are people working on it. That's as much as I know. So complex state management, just kind of like a thing to consider is that, the more, like, this goes back to the last slide, like the more complicated the web component, the harder it's going to be in React to kind of keep state in sync with what's going on in the component. So the more stateless the web component is, or the more encapsulated it is, the easier this is going to be. There are lots of projects that are working on like interop. I'll touch on those at the end. And also browser support. Like if you have to handle anything before like IE 11, you're kind of out of luck, because this is based on like ES6, and there's some other issues. But in general, if we're moving forward, we can do it. Also, can't read that at all. Sorry. Dan Abramov works on the React team. He's kind of like the biggest Twitter guy, I guess. He's just kind of influential in like the web space in general, but also he talks a lot about React, and so he was getting a ton of questions. This was like 3 days ago. I don't know. Someone asked him like, can we have better web component support in React? There's a lot of responses on this, but his summary was like, I don't see a reason why this couldn't happen in like the next major version. Like there's been a lot of discussion on the React library GitHub about web components for literally like 3 years. Like these people have been talking about this stuff and whether they play together, and if React can change and stuff, and they are working on it, and everyone kind of wants this to work. But the key thing he says is like there was no consensus from the web components community on how it should work, but it seems like we're getting there. Like the point is, browser vendors and all this other stuff kind of have to weigh in, and we have to arrive at some sort of if we arrive at some sort of standard and way that these things should operate before React's really going to change their mind because they're like, we're fine. So I have a bunch of resources. I'll post these slides later, but there's a lot of great stuff. The top 3 are libraries that are kind of like helpful to abstract the creation process of web components and have been helpful to kind of like build stuff out. There's a lot of really interesting stuff with like rendering and doing things in different ways, but also just a lot of links about standards, about guides, and other things like that to read, because this is like where I've been living the last week, and it's kind of been overwhelming. But I hope that was helpful. Thank you.